Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening and welcome to the No Treason Podcast, episode 9. I'm your host, Jonathan Drake. Thank you for joining me. Now, I had hopes of wrapping up the No Treason essay this week, but as it turns out, there's just no way to cram everything that I want to get through in one episode. Section 19, this final section, is sort of like the wood between the worlds in C.S. Lewis's Magician's Nephew, the forest full of small pools of water that if you want to travel to another world, you dive in with the magic ring and end up in different universes, different dimensions, etc. In this section, there are any number of those rabbit hole type pools that you could dive into, spend entire episodes on, or in like college coursework framework, spend a whole semester of presentation and research and lectures and whatnot. It's quite a deep topic, or a deep section full of quite a few topics that you can pull the threads on. But we looked last week at the two tiers that Spooner describes of the real rulers, the tools of tyranny, and the financiers of tyranny. These two tiers. Tonight, we'll take a dive into the financiers, the superior class, and just see how they really control the country and how they, in Spooner's day, conspired to rip America apart with the so-called Civil War. I've never really liked that term, Civil War, because there's not much civility in war. Now, we're all familiar with the official narrative that the North, out of its hatred for slavery, fought a bloody war to free the black man from the evil South. Or maybe you've acknowledged that aspect, but having done some more research, you know that there was also the goal of preserving the Union, and that Abraham Lincoln was a hero for doing so, and he rightfully earned his spot on Mount Rushmore. And maybe having done some more research, you understand that there was an international push to try and dissolve the Union, led by international bankers who, with the coup against the Constitution as represented by the Reconstruction Amendments, with those firmly in place, ultimately they won the day 50 years after the war, roughly 50 years or so, when they finally created the Federal Reserve and took total control. Spooner paints not an entirely different picture, but certainly one that I was not fully aware of, and one that led me down some interesting research paths of my own. I'm not sure if he made the connections that I've made that I feel are warranted, but he very clearly understands the enemy. He describes them very well, and as such provides a fantastic philosophical antenna for finding signal throughout history and then filtering out the noise. So tonight, let's do some filtering. But first, one of the quotes from this essay that has been deeply impactful to me was from Section 3's discussion on taxes. Spooner wrote that the only security men can have for their political liberty consists in their keeping their money in their own pockets. Also, the at this point oft-cited maxim about political power resting on the matter of money. Given those truths and the fact that the global regime basically boils down to a massive Ponzi scheme, and the only way to beat a fraudulent, centralized monetary system is to switch to a decentralized, verifiable system of value and security. So it is my pleasure to have River Bitcoin as one of this week's sponsors. Stack Sats with River, the Bitcoin-only platform built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. Why River? 0 free recurring buys. Stack Bitcoin effortlessly, hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly. 3.8% Bitcoin interest on cash, FDIC insured, no minimums, withdraw anytime. Expert US-based support, human help plus private client services for big guys, that would be $100,000 or more. Business accounts, boost your balance sheet with Bitcoin and earn 3.8% paid in Bitcoin. Top tier wallet, send, receive, and manage Bitcoin securely. Unmatched security, full reserve custody, multi-sig cold storage, and proof of reserves. Join the Bitcoin revolution at badlandsmedia.tv/river and earn real returns. That's badlandsmedia.tv/river. It says 3.8%. I believe it's 3.5 at this point. That is probably subject to change over time, so be sure to check that out. I personally use River Bitcoin, so awesome to see them advertising with Badlands, as I know they have been for a while. And of course, there's the phrase, not your key, not your Bitcoin. And if you take Spooner's maxim about sovereignty over your own money as the only guarantee of liberty to its logical end, once you buy Bitcoin, you need a way to keep it secure. I personally use, which I'm not an expert, so don't take that as expert advice, but I personally use Trezor cold storage wallets, and I'm also happy to see them as sponsors at Badlands. Your crypto deserves the ultimate protection, and Trezor delivers just that. Trezor offers a secure and user-friendly solution for managing your digital assets. It delivers on its promise of robust security, providing a crucial layer of protection against online threats and unauthorized access. Since 2014, over 2 million users have trusted Trezor, the world's first hardware wallet, to secure their Bitcoin, Ethereum, and over 9,000 other coins and tokens. With state-of-the-art encryption and offline storage, Trezor keeps your assets safe from hackers, malware, and exchange breaches. Its open-source design ensures transparency, while the Trezor Suite app makes managing your portfolio a breeze. Buy, sell, swap, and track with ease. Designed with simplicity in mind, Trezor ensures that even those new to cryptocurrency can navigate its features with ease. With Trezor, you can confidently manage your cryptocurrencies, knowing that your digital wealth is protected by industry-leading security protocols. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor, that's Trezor, to get your Trezor and safeguard your crypto with confidence. That's badlandsmedia.tv/Trezor. And anyone who sees their wife or husband or children suffering from dry and cracked hands this winter would have no difficulty in gifting them some revolutionary lotion to ease their discomfort. But Jesus gave us the ultimate difficult command to not just love those easy to love, but also to love our enemies. The real test, then, is when you happen upon one of these blood money loan mongers that Spooner speaks of, and they're connivingly writhing and wringing their hands and licking their greedy chops as they're wont to do, and you realize how chafed they must be. This Christmas, extend the olive branch, love your enemies, and give them soft disclosure.
Soft disclosure just dropped new favorites for the season. The lotion, your 5-ounce favorite, is still here. And now we've added full 11-ounce bottles. New lavender tea tree deodorant, clean, calm, and effective. New tallow bars, chamomile lemon rose, and naked. Rich moisture that actually works. And on Black Friday, the new arrivals land. Introducing our first men's only formula, beard oil, in unscented and spiced vanilla. Truth, tamed, and finally your beard is too. Tallow lip balms, made with beef tallow and lanolin for serious moisture. Available in chamomile mint, vanilla, naked, and vanilla tangerine. Plus, mini tallow bars, same deep moisture as the full size. Available in vanilla coffee and naked. And finally, lavender vanilla lotion. Smooth, soothing, and worth the wait. On Black Friday, the new products arrive, and so do the Black Friday bundles. Visit softdisclosure.com for truth you can gift.
Soft disclosure. Just realized I forgot to grab, about to read some rants from last week. And let's see, where is it? There it is. Rocky Top Apologist dropped $10 in a rant last week. Did you say Lindell is the InfoWar quartermaster? Love it. And yes, I did. Peyton Pooh for $5. Remember, if we didn't sign it, can't bind it. Love the relevance to all this. Fresh breath of reason that seems to be the missing link in the devolution theory may be the recoil we hope for. I'm not going to claim to be the missing link in anything, although my wife might say as much in the middle of winter when I take off my shirt and my Greek heritage shines through. Polymathanon for $10. Happy birthday, Jonathan. Yesterday, that was November 22nd. I hope you had a great weekend, and I did, in theory. I had to work that weekend, but such is life. And then Esther dropped a boost. No more butt talk, please. This is Beth. I don't know if I can keep tuning in, but I am glad to know Spooner was a certified butt guy for $25, and that was worth every penny. Janice 2022, responding to Claire Cat in the chat last week, said, ain't that the truth? It's staggering to consider how badly governed we've been for so long, how cheated and abused when we acted in good faith. And that's certainly well taken. I would say we don't actually really need to be governed. If you're not violating someone else's natural rights, you have no occasion to be governed. And if you think about a contract, if one party has acted in good faith and the other is being dishonest, they're acting in bad faith, are you still liable to that contract? Under natural law, the answer would be no. If you think about like how the percentage of the population that actually engages in crime that creates a victim that violates someone else's natural rights and is not just breaking some arbitrary rule, it's a relatively small percent. That doesn't mean we're all in relationship with God, good people per se, but at the very least, most of us recognize it pays better to not be disruptive to other people's rights. Janice 2022 also said, yes, that's the question for me. Is there a kind of governance that doesn't become this nasty thing? That is a deep question, highly nuanced answers, and kind of the gist of everything we're talking about here. We're demonstrating at the very least what we're told was the pinnacle of human political philosophical enterprise, and that we'd figure it out. We'd finally solved thousands of years of human history, and all came down to a document 250 years ago. We're finding out that the story we were told about that is not true in the least. So it is a challenge. How do we solve this question of political interaction with one another in a way that is ultimately honoring to God by being honoring to one another? And ultimately, we can't, because that's where most political philosophies fail, is that they're ultimately trying to do what only the gospel can do, repair the human heart, restore the human heart, and restore right relationship with God. Can't do that politically, but at the very least, we can come up with systems, strategies, and methods to at least make the best of a bad situation. And it requires vigilance on all of our part to protect our own rights and ultimately protect the rights of other people. Which we'll get into that once we get into trial by jury. Once more, another deflection. Okay, let's get into section 19. It begins, I read this last week, now what is true in Europe is substantially true in this country. And of course, last week we were discussing the borrow and tax scam and the way that the money lenders, who are the top tier of the control structure, how they finance robbers and murderers to conduct robberies and murders to make them and their masters rich, and it's at our expense. So he says he was primarily describing Europe, but he is applying the same analysis here to the U.S. because the difference in government format ultimately doesn't matter. Europe has its monarchs, and we here in the US have our constitutional republic. At the end of the day, it's the same racket. It's the same source of rulers, the same class. Maybe there's competing factions within that class, but ultimately they're all in on screwing us over. And none of them can prove any sense of legitimacy. So they're ultimately ruling because they have more power than we do. Like Joe Biden said, you need an F-15 to fight back. I don't have one of those. Don't know if anyone else in Badlands does or not, but I'd prefer to fight back a different way, and we'll get into that at some point too. But just like in Europe, when the state's authority is challenged, whether the state has been elected or they're ruling by so-called divine right, the state will protect itself at all costs, and preferably in a manner that is provocative enough to prevent any future challenges. Spooner was incredibly well read and could have easily rattled off many examples of European wars, uprisings, put-downs, and so on to demonstrate the horrific reality over there. But the fact that such horrors could happen here in this country was clearly a primary motivator for his philosophy, as the impact of the Civil War has a dramatic presence in his writing. He writes, "What is important to be noticed is that these so-called presidents, senators, and representatives, these pretended agents of all the people of the United States, the moment their exactions meet with any formidable resistance from any portion of the people themselves, are obliged, like their co-robbers and murderers in Europe, to fly at once to the lenders of blood money for the means to sustain their power. And if they borrow their money on the same principle and for the same purpose, that is, to be expended in shooting down all those, quote, people of the United States, their own constituents and principles, as they profess to call them, who resist the robberies and enslavement which these borrowers of the money are practicing upon them. And they expect to repay the loans, if at all, only from the proceeds of the future robberies, which they anticipate it will be easy for them and their successors to perpetrate through a long series of years upon their pretended principles, if they can but shoot down now some hundreds of thousands of them, and thus strike terror into the rest." Now, with that quote, we can immediately sense that something is off about the official narrative we all grew up learning in school regarding the Civil War. So tonight we'll approach the Civil War with the first of two fresh perspectives that Spooner provides for us. First is his specific explanation, which does provide a more immediate, as far as timeline, a more immediate cause. And then ultimately we'll be able to get to a zoomed out view of a more macro geopolitical cause. This view is easily inferred from Spooner's explicit view, which is actually how I ended up stumbling upon it, and can be more or less confirmed by using his claims as a doorway into a broader research topic. And I'm hoping to get to that next week. I'm still kind of digging around and connecting a few dots. So tonight we'll go over the view that Spooner presents in Section 19. And his basic premise, of course, is that the Constitution is not a contract that is binding on anyone. It poses no authority over anyone, and it provides no meaningful restraint on anyone who claims authority by it. As such, the government we have that they had is populated by a secret band of robbers and murderers who collateralized their thievery and murder to borrow vast sums of money they euphemistically call the national debt. And remember that euphemism is a euphemism for lying. The borrower being the slave of the lender, this secret band is subservient to the real rulers, the blood money loanmongers, as he calls them. Spooner named the Rothschilds as representatives of that vile class. And this upper tier will protect its power at all costs and spend whatever amount and do whatever is necessary to do so. No event in this country's history demonstrates this more provocatively than the American Civil War. Perhaps the facts were never made more evident in any country on the globe than in our own, that these soulless blood money loanmongers are the real rulers, that they rule from the most sordid and mercenary motives, that the ostensible government, the presidents, senators, and representatives, so-called, are merely their tools, and that no ideas of or regard for justice or liberty had anything to do in inducing them to lend money for the war. And proof of all of this, look at the following facts. So proof of what? That the soulless blood money loanmongers are the real rulers, that what we think is the actual government is just their tool, which means we don't really need to play around with the notions that we have any say in truly choosing them, or at least having been chosen, they're most likely sat down and conditioned to the reality of their real masters. In my mind, the difference is irrelevant as far as the outcome. And then the last thing that we are proving is that the money they lent for the Civil War to those tools, the government at the time, was definitively not for the purposes of justice or liberty, which means right now we can, out of the gate, dismiss altruistic abolitionist motivations on the part of the decision makers as being the 1860s versions of WMDs in Iraq, babies being tossed out of incubators, a totally surprise attack on perfectly lined up for torpedo bombing battleships at Pearl Harbor. Fill in the blank of your choice as far as war beginning psyop. So, what follows are 8 facts offered as proof of those things. 1, national belief or national professed beliefs don't match national reality. 2, slavery was institutionalized by the North as much as by the South. 3, the South seceded to escape its financial slavery imposed by the North. 4, the North fought to maintain economic and financial control, not to free the slaves. 5, the Emancipation Proclamation was military strategy, not humanitarian altruism. 6, the war was financed by these loanmongers. 7, the loans weren't free. And lastly, 8, centralization and consolidation of total control was their goal. So on point number 1, national beliefs don't match national reality. And what is it that we profess to believe? Among other things, we professed long ago to have learned that governments could rightfully exist only by the free will and on the voluntary support of those who might choose to sustain them. We all professed to have known long ago that the only legitimate objects of government were the maintenance of liberty and justice equally for all. And we professed to look with pity and contempt on those ignorant, superstitious, and enslaved peoples of Europe, who were so easily kept in subjection by the frauds and force of priests and kings. And of course, we profess to be a freedom and liberty loving people. And yet, point 2, slavery was institutionalized by the North as much as by the South. Now, Spooner was an outspoken abolitionist prior to the war. He wrote an essay entitled The Unconstitutionality of Slavery, and I've read through a good portion of it. He writes a lot of long essays, but if you would like to read that, I recommend you do. There's a lot of repeat of the ideas that he presents in No Treason, but he then applies them to the concept of slavery, and it's worthwhile reading through. I will have a link in the description below if you would like to check that out. He was an activist in every sense of the term. He believed certain things and he acted on them. So the point 2 is that slavery was institutionalized by the North as much as by the South. And the way that was accomplished was that the Northern moneylenders financed the Southern slaveholders. He writes, notwithstanding all this that we had learned and known and professed for nearly a century, these lenders of blood money had, for a long series of years previous to the war, been the willing accomplices of the slaveholders in perverting the government from the purposes of liberty and justice to the greatest of crimes. Now think back to the three things that were listed as fact, that three things that we know that these facts are in proof of. The third one I mentioned was that the money lent for the Civil War was definitively not for the purpose of justice or liberty. The proof here is that the institution of slavery, which violates everything that we profess to believe about liberty, was not just a Southern problem, but was a Northern one, and really an international one, since the cotton industry was heavily tied to British finance, originally directly and then eventually by proxy through the North. And understanding that the borrower is slave to the lender, the North was quite happy to finance the Southern slaveholders, the backbone of the Southern economy, because it had such loans not only paid well, but also provided the means by which the North gained dominance over the South in the decades preceding the Civil War. The North wasn't content to just partner with the South, but sought to subjugate and control them. He writes, they had been such accomplices for a purely pecuniary consideration, to wit, a control of the markets in the South. In other words, the privilege of holding the slaveholders themselves in industrial and commercial subjection to the manufacturers and merchants of the North, who afterwards furnished the money for the war. Now, Spooner doesn't mention the issue of tariffs, but next week I'll show you how they were used in conjunction with and in concert with these financial means. But of course, you can't very well claim to be against the institution of slavery while funding its existence for literally decades. Which leads to point 3, that the South seceded to escape financial slavery of themselves. He writes, but the slaveholders, either doubting the fidelity of their Northern allies or feeling themselves strong enough to keep their slaves in subjection without Northern assistance, would no longer pay the price which these Northern men demanded. And this is where we encounter an interesting rabbit hole to go down. Bookmark this in your mind, because I'm not going to go into the issue of tariffs and such in this episode. I'll cover that next week. We'll definitely be coming back to it. But the South did not, there was multiple reasons, but Spooner is claiming that the primary one was the financial slavery that they had been subjected to, not simply states' rights. I'll wait till next week. I've got a lot of information on that, and it's pretty fascinating. So point 4, let me recap real quick. We've got point 1 is that we have national beliefs that don't match the reality, and we have slavery was institutionalized by the North as much as by the South, which demonstrates that those professed beliefs don't match reality. And then point 3, that the and under point 2, the way it was institutionalized was because the North was financing it. Point 3, the South seceded to escape the financial slavery of themselves. And then point 4, the North fought to maintain economic and financial control, not to free the slaves. He writes, it was to enforce this price in the future, and here is the price, that is to monopolize the Southern markets, to maintain their industrial and commercial control over the South, that these Northern manufacturers and merchants lent some of their profits of their former monopolies for the war in order to secure to themselves the same or greater monopolies in the future. These, and not any love of liberty or justice, were the motives on which the money for the war was lent by the South. Or was lent by the North, excuse me. But of course, you can't just come out and say that. Yeah, we're fighting this war because we're trying to get our money. That's not exactly good marketing. Join the army and help make the bankers rich is a hard sell on recruitment posters. So just like today, they leaned into plausible deniability, plausible moral rationale to justify their crimes, because there was certainly a large contingent of the population in the North that was abolitionist, Spooner himself being an example of that. But to that point, he writes, and to hide at once, if possible, both their servility and their crimes, they attempt to divert public attention by crying out that they had abolished slavery, that they had saved the country, that they had preserved our glorious union, and that in now paying the national debt, as they call it, as if the people themselves, all of them who are to be taxed for its payment, had really and voluntarily joined in contracting it, they are simply maintaining the national honor. By maintaining the national honor, they mean simply that they themselves, open robbers and murderers, assume to be the nation, and will keep faith with those who lend them the money necessary to enable them to crush the great body of the people under their feet, and will faithfully appropriate from the proceeds of their future robberies and murders enough to pay all their loans, principal, and interest. Of course, we know from last week that they'll never stop borrowing because they need reason to tax. But moving on, the pretense that the abolition of slavery was either a motive or justification for the war is a fraud of the same character with that of maintaining the national honor. And then this is one of my favorite quotes in the essay. Who, but such usurpers, robbers, and murderers as they, ever established slavery? Or what government, except one resting upon the sword like the one we now have, was ever capable of maintaining slavery? But if this is true, why, if they really didn't care about slavery, if they financed slavery, if they are the only types of people that would create such an institution and fight to maintain it, why would they abolish it? And ultimately, it's because it made sense militarily, which we'll get into in a moment. But more importantly, especially for us, they found a better form. And why did these men abolish slavery? Not from any love of liberty in general, not as an act of justice to the black man himself, but only as a war measure, and because they wanted his assistance and that of his friends in carrying on the war they had undertaken for the maintaining and intensifying that political, commercial, and industrial slavery to which they have subjected the great body of the people, both white and black. There was no difference in principle, but only of degree, between the slavery they boast they have abolished and the slavery they were fighting to preserve. For all restraints upon men's natural liberty, not necessary for the simple maintenance of justice, are the nature of slavery, and differ from each other only in degree. So they were freeing the slaves at that time to set up the system by which we have all become enslaved. Which, to that point 5, the Emancipation Proclamation was military strategy, not humanitarian altruism. In short, the North said to the slaveholders, if you will not pay us our price, which was give us control of your markets, for our assistance against your slaves, we will secure the same price, keep control of your markets, by helping your slaves against you, and using them as our tools for maintaining dominion over you. For the control of your markets we will have, whether the tools we use for that purpose be black or white, and be the cost in blood and money what it may. So freeing the slaves unlocked a new resource for the North. There's no records, to my knowledge. I've kind of poked around. I wasn't able to find any of any sort of uprisings or anything like that. But a large number of freed slaves ended up joining the Union Army, and apparently the military does keep records of those sorts of things. And so based on that, anywhere from 180 to 200,000 black men ended up serving in the Union Army by the time the war was over. So at the very least, they found themselves a new source of cannon fodder. Point 6, the war was financed by these loanmongers. So we've had them financing the Southern slavery, and now they're financing the war to make good on their loans. On this principle and from this motive, and not from any love of liberty or justice, the money was lent in enormous amounts and at enormous rates of interest. And it was only by means of these loans that the objects of the war were accomplished. The financial records for the federal government have been preserved. Obviously, you have to take things with a grain of salt, information among other information, as Chris Paul would say. But you can search them today. They're preserved in online libraries. So it's possible to determine that roughly 80 to 85% of the expenditures of the war, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 billion or something to that effect in the dollar value at that time. But 80 to 85% of that was financed through private lenders, and that included an association of New York banks, national banks, which were chartered in 1863. Some of you may be aware of the greenbacks that were printed at that time. There were private insurance companies that helped pay. Various manufacturing associations lent money. And of course, there's plenty of rabbit holes that you can go down on each entry into that list, but we'll save some of that for later. Or I encourage you to start digging around and do some research on your own into that information there. And of course, a relevant question to think about, given the list of the funding entities for the Civil War, who funded the funders? Because if you start poking down the question of how much was Europe involved in trying to fund the breakup of the United States, the official answer is they weren't, because European central banks did not officially purchase bonds, for instance, for the national banks that were chartered in 1863. They did not officially purchase, a lot of the British did purchase cotton bonds, which were a way that the Confederacy tried to raise money. But there's very little official connection to any sort of financing. So that's why you ask the question, well, who funded the funders? Because they point to, the war was primarily funded 80 to 85% here domestically. But if you start digging on those domestic loan mongers, the well from which they drew their own credit was European. So they did it by proxy, which is a very key thing to keep in your mind. So the war was financed domestically by proxy through these loan mongers. And point 7, the loans weren't free. And now these lenders of blood money demand their pay. And the government, so-called, becomes their tool, their servile, slavish, villainous tool to extort it from the labor of the enslaved people, both of the North and the South. It is to be extorted by every form of direct and indirect and unequal taxation. Not only the nominal debt and interest, enormous as the latter was, are to be paid in full, but these holders of the debt are to be paid still further, and perhaps doubly, triply, or quadruply paid by such tariffs on imports as will enable our home manufacturers to realize enormous prices for their commodities. Also by such monopolies in banking as will enable them to keep control of and thus enslave and plunder the industry and trade of the great body of the northern people themselves. In short, the industrial and commercial slavery of the great body of the people, North and South, black and white, is the price which these lenders of blood money demand and insist upon and are determined to secure in return for the money lent for the war. You can read about the Reconstruction era and its horrors. Having lived in the South, I lived in North Carolina for a number of years. There are people that act as if it was yesterday. There's deep scars cut across the South, and I'm sure anyone living in the South can attest to that there are people that, like I said, they act as if it was yesterday. It was something that they felt was done to them. And the reality is it was done to all of us. The things that we struggle with today, the centralized federal government that we struggle with today, while it has its conception in the Constitution was really given birth to in the Civil War and the years following the Civil War. Point 8, centralization and consolidation of total control was the goal. The whole affair, on the part of those who furnished the money, has been, and now is, a deliberate scheme of robbery and murder, not merely to monopolize the markets of the South, but also to monopolize the currency, and thus control the industry and trade, and thus plunder and enslave the laborers of both North and South. But we have the Constitution. We have elections. We the people. This is the land of the free. But the reality is, still another of the frauds of these men is that they are now establishing, and that the war was designed to establish, a government, quote, in quotes, a government of consent. The only idea they ever have manifested as to what is a government of consent is this, that it is one to which everybody must consent or be shot. This idea was the dominant one on which the war was carried on, and it is the dominant one now that we have got what is called peace. Their pretenses that they have saved the country and preserved our glorious union are frauds, like all the rest of their pretenses. By them, they mean simply that they have subjugated and maintained their power over an unwilling people. This they call saving the country, as if an enslaved and subjugated people, or as if any people kept in subjection by the sword, as it is intended that all of us shall be hereafter, could be said to have any country. This, too, they call preserving our glorious union, as if there could be said to be any union, glorious or inglorious, that was not voluntary, or as if there could be said to be any union between masters and slaves, between those who conquer and those who are subjugated. That's really quite a sobering quote if you sit and think about it for a few minutes. Because if you take that at face value, what he's really saying is that the Civil War, if we had any hopes of having a country, we live here, we want this to be our country, but the Civil War essentially finalized their plans or put into heavy motion their plans to take it away from us. Which makes you really think about Trump's comments about giving power back to, us, the people. There's a lot to think about there. And as I said in episode 1, while I love Trump, I love what he's doing. Like a lot of the people in Badlands, he's the only one I give any sense of benefit of the doubt to. But we are not beholden to whatever his vision is for what the country is going to be. That's, if it truly is power back to us, the people, then that's something that we have, according to Spooner, a right and a duty to have a say in, which is ultimately why I really enjoy this essay, and I'm very thankful to have an opportunity to dig through it with all of you. All these cries of having abolished slavery, of having saved the country, of having preserved the Union, of establishing a government of consent, and of maintaining the national honor are all gross, shameless, transparent cheats, so transparent that they ought to deceive no one when uttered as justifications for the war, or for the government that has succeeded the war, or for now compelling the people to pay the cost of the war, or for compelling anybody to support a government that he does not want. Now, I don't know about you, but that is not the Civil War narrative that I was taught. To recap the facts that he highlights, which prove his point, we have national professed beliefs don't match national reality. So the existence of slavery in the South and the financing of it in the North don't match our beliefs of liberty. Slavery was institutionalized by the North as much as by the South. the South seceded to escape its financial slavery imposed by the North. 4, the North fought to maintain economic and political and financial control. 5, the Emancipation Proclamation was military strategy, not humanitarian altruism. And this is on the part of the decision makers. Obviously, again, a large portion of the population did want to get rid of slavery, and a lot of the soldiers probably did sign up to do that, but they, unfortunately, like a lot of soldiers today, were being used by the people who did not have that as their motivation. Number 6, the war was financed by these loan mongers. Number 7, the loans were not free, and we are paying the price today. And 8, centralization and consolidation of total control was the ultimate goal. So instead of a noble enterprise, we have a cold, calculated, merciless machine methodically destroying our country, taking it away from us. And they're building a twisted empire on its ruins. And they're doing so while hiding behind notions of patriotism, of unity. We hear a lot about that today. Same playbook, same people. We hear a lot about these notions of liberty. And the lesson, to pull the final quote from the essay, apart from the appendix, the lesson taught by all these facts is this: as long as mankind continued to pay national debts, so-called, that is, so long as they are such dupes and cowards as to pay for being cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, so long there will be enough to lend the money for these purposes. And with that money, a plenty of tools called soldiers can be hired to keep them in subjection. But when they refuse any longer to pay for thus being cheated, plundered, enslaved, and murdered, they will cease to have cheats and usurpers and robbers and murderers and blood-money loanmongers for masters. Now, you might accuse Spooner of being idealistic. That's certainly a common critique of his writing. But I would argue that he is just simply telling us the truth. This is how government, actually works. This is how we are actually enslaved. And the Civil War is a perfect demonstration of that. A perfect microcosm of their entire system, even down to the types of lies they tell to get us to not only not fight back, but stand shoulder to shoulder with them in achieving their goals. We can see this today with any number of issues. Pick your favorite psyop to get us into a war. Think of immigration, terrorism, poverty, crime, failing infrastructure, poorly performing education systems, a disaster of a medical system, government inefficiency out the wazoo, booming and busting economies, falling dollar, humanitarian crises, poorly handled natural disasters, and on and on and on. They create the problem, and then they finance the solution, which turns out to not be an actual solution at all, but just creates more problems, which allows them to create more and finance more solutions. And they get rich off of the succeeding taxation to provide the solution. Or they're awarded monopolies in industry, banking, and technology, and any other industry. That's how it works. That is Spooner's paradigm. The hard part, of course, is where we, as he says, cease to have robbers and murderers and loanmongers for masters, especially when you consider how long they've been at this game. But understanding the problem is the first step towards correcting the problem, and that's what I'm hoping to be doing right now. Given what we've covered so far, do you think we can vote our way out of this system? I don't. I think it's tempting to black pill over learning all this stuff, and I admit that was really my mental state for a lot of years. But I am personally incredibly encouraged by, first, having this platform to be able to get this message out there, to prompt the conversation, to challenge our preconceived notions. And second, I'm encouraged by all of you listening and sharing the show, engaging in chat. I'm encouraged by the existence of Badlands Media and the movement that we represent. And by Badlands, I don't mean people who sit here in front of a camera talking to themselves for an hour, which I'm still having a hard time getting used to. But everyone in the audience, everyone who comes to a GART, everyone who takes part in Telegram chat, everyone who comments on a show, everyone who leaves a rant, everyone who leaves a boost, anything. The fact that there's so many of us, and we are, in spite of not seeking to be unified, we are ultimately unified by a common purpose. There wasn't the social bandwidth for these ideas, or people like you, people like me, even 10 years ago. How many of you were talking about any of the things that we talk about today, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and getting any positive reception? It wasn't that long ago, and I'm talking pre-COVID. You were an anti-vaxxer for even asking questions about vaccinating children. And now I regularly talk with people who think it's completely obvious to question those things, or they regret having given them to their children, or they are extremely happy that their children woke up and didn't give it to their grandchildren. When I grew up in the 80s as a homeschooled weirdo, people would be shocked to find out that we were homeschooled and even appalled that my parents would think of doing such a thing. But now the usual response is, oh, I wish I could do that. I'm just not smart enough. I don't have enough education. I have to work. Or you encounter people and either they homeschool or someone they know homeschools. Oh, my sister does that. Oh, my daughter does that. Oh, my friends do that. The information war landscape is changing quite rapidly right in front of us. And I've been saying this for a while, but you don't take down a millennia-old pedophilic, blood money, loan-mongering, Satan-worshipping cabal overnight. And you certainly don't take them down without recognizing how they do what they do and without recognizing every iteration, every pattern, every play in their playbook, which is why I love Spooner. Because through his lens, you can see, which you can verify with your own observation, their playbook really isn't that thick. They just run the same plays over and over and over because they keep working. But with the help of Spooner's framework, we can recognize those more easily, and finding the signal becomes simple and straightforward. So to that point, next week, we will officially wrap up No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority, number 6, by following a few of the rabbit holes I mentioned and getting a zoomed out picture of pretty much the entire 1800s, but the decades leading up to the Civil War, who was involved and what that pattern means for us today and for plans of creating something better going into the Golden Age. And after that, my hope is to start a series on trial by a jury, encompassing Spooner's ideas on self-government, property rights, and how to take back control over the foundation of all political power, which is, as Spooner says, money. And he actually has a lot to say about that. I recently started reading, I'm almost finished reading it, but I discovered an essay of his in which he lays out quite an interesting monetary theory. So I'm sure we'll be touching on some of that as well. But with that, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you all next week.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.